And you're live.
Thank you. Good morning. This is a meeting of the Joint-Fiscal Committee on Wednesday, April 14th, and we have a rather full agenda, so I'm going to launch into it. The first order of business is adopting the minutes of February 9th and 11th. Would someone care to make a motion on that?
So moved.
Did you get that, Teresa? We got a couple so moved.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Is there any discussion? Not seeing any. All in favor, please. I think we say aye rather than
Aye.
yeah.
Aye.
Please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Please say no. Okay, so those are adopted. Now, the first order of business is this request for reallocation of the ERA funds that we originally dealt with. I think it was in February. And Mr. Farnham, you're at the top of the agenda and you're the person I've spoken to about this. So let me turn this presentation over to you, and if you could take us through the request.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Absolutely. For the record, Douglas Farnham, I'm the Chief Operational Officer for the Agency of Administration. And it's thank you for having us here today. I really appreciate your time and especially pulling it together when I know there's so many competing interests. I'm going to try to be quick and then so that you can have time to talk to the various experts for each of the programs related to this money. So the request today, you are correct, Madam Chair, that the original AA1 approval was stemmed from the February 11th meeting. And in that meeting, 110 million was allocated to AOA, 12.7 million to public service, 15 million to AHS for primarily being used for reach-up payments, 9 million to Department of Housing and Community Development, and 53.3 million was left with AOA to meet future needs. So the request today speaks only to the 9 million that was allocated to the Department of Housing and Community Development for housing stability services or other housing services. And the proposal is to reallocate $6 million of that 9 million. So leave 3 million with the HCD for them to perform some of those services and reallocate 6 million to the Department of Children and Families Office of Economic Opportunity to, all right, I apologize, I may have added the Office of Economic Opportunity inappropriately, just to the Department of Children and Families to perform the same function, the same other housing services, housing stability services as defined by the Treasury. So we're not proposing to change the use at all, just change the department that is managing those uses. Because one of the things that we did immediately, shortly after the the Consolidated Appropriations Act was passed last December, was a group with DHCD, DCF, the SHA, a lot of the departments with related programs came together and talked about the ways that this money could be best deployed. And since the initial request in February, it just, it's our opinion that DCF is more positioned to put this money out there more effectively at the moment than Department of Housing and Community Development. And so that's the reason for the $6 million reallocation request. And I think that is the meat of it, Madam Chair. I'm happy to field any questions.
Thank you. And I see a hand. Senator Kitchell.
Oh, thank you. I didn't put my yellow hand up, just my, when we approved the grant back in February, there was a certain there was a defined in terms of what would be permissible uses, both for the money that we did appropriate to AHS, and that's where the 53 came from because we cut some in half. So my question is, have we gotten, we obviously had greater clarity in terms of what constitutes housing stability services subsequent to our meeting? Because my recollection was several of those areas were still pretty spongy at that time.
Yes, you're correct, Senator. We've gotten at least one more iteration of guidance, possibly two. I can't remember if we've gotten two or one, but we have gotten additional clarity, and we've gotten actually some very helpful clarity, which is a nice change of pace. The biggest point of clarity that let us move forward with this particular $6 million is that Treasury separated completely the administrative calculation, the 10% allowance for administrative costs, from the housing stability services calculation. So before that, those two pots of money looked like they were mixed together because they were in a sentence with and Treasury said, no, you have 90% at least for direct financial assistance and up to 10% for housing stability services. And then each of those activities can have a 10% administrative allowance. And managing that administrative allowance at AOA to make sure as a state, as a grantee, we do not break that 10% threshold. That's one of my main roles with this money, is just making sure that we manage the administrative cost side of it. And so that is one reason we started moving more quickly and are proposing to reallocate the $6 million, is that we feel more confident about where the lines are drawn related to administrative fees and housing stability services. I think that there are some other additional guidance related to the potential to apply the funds to hotels and motels. And I think we're still doing some legwork there. We're not quite ready to propose a use for the money, but I think we still feel there's potentially an opportunity there, and we're pulling together information to make sure that we're solid and can present a proposal on what that would look like.
Okay, thank you. That would be encouraging if we could apply it to the cost of hotels and motels.
Right. I would say we're in the stage of researching how we would have to change things and how feasible those changes would be for us to make to see what that would look like.
So, Mr. Farnham, when are we likely to see a proposal for that and for that use?
I can re-engage with AHS. I know that we are actively working on it. I don't know that we have come to a specific delivery date, but I can come back and try to see if we can give you a clearer time frame. I just don't have one at the top of my head right now.
I think we all would appreciate that, as it directly affects other decisions that appropriators are considering, at least. So, committee, the particular question before us is the authorization of this transfer of the $6 million from ACCD, the Department of Housing Conservation. I'm not getting the title correct, you understand, to AHS. So are there questions about that particular issue? And I'm not seeing hands. Can you give a sentence or two description of the sort of services that would be provided at AHS or at DCF rather than at the Department of Housing and the Department of Housing? And maybe this is a Sarah question, Ms. Phillips question.
Madam Chair, I do believe Director Phillips would be much more qualified to answer that than I would be.
Sure, I'm happy to. Sarah Phillips, Director of the Office of Economic Opportunity and the Department for Children and Families. So we are using some of our existing framework around how we define housing stability services at the department. We issued a notice and an application that is open and ongoing. through the end of April. We actually issued that as a joint RFP, as you will, with the Department of Housing and Community Development, not anticipating that we would get responses where in some cases it would be more appropriate for them to enter into a subrecipient grant agreement because of existing relationships, vendor relationships there, and in some cases it would be more appropriate for DCF to enter into the subrecipient grant agreement. But to answer your question more specifically, housing stability services ranges from landlord-tenant mediation services, legal services, housing search and placement support, support to help people retain their housing once they are housed, outreach services to ensure that folks know about VRAP and support in applying, support with recertification process that has to occur every 3 months. We are also funding some training for case managers so that we can, leverage, not just fund new services, but leverage existing service providers so that they're able to understand what the program is and are able to have their case managers effectively work with their clients. So for instance, a Head Start teacher should know what VRAP is and should know how to help their Head Start parents apply, and we don't need to fund a separate case manager to support that. So that's kind of the range of services. They're working with all households who are eligible to apply for the Emergency Rental Assistance Program and or have received or have enrolled in the program. So that's the sort of full scope of services, and each applicant, of course, puts in their own application based on their specific geographic area or specific sort of focal point. To date, we've received more than $4 million in requests for funding, and so we're eager to move forward with some of those awards and put that money in motion.
Thank you. Representative Kornheiser?
Thanks. Sarah, I'm curious about, given how many folks we have since the pandemic who are accessing services for the very first time, how you're going to be able to, using existing providers, how you're going to be able to sort of shift their strategies to be able to work with folks who are not accustomed to that level of paperwork and hoop jumping and all the things that are involved in accessing existing services.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of, it's a great question. Thank you. I think part of the effort of outreach will just be the part of Vermont State Housing Authority and their vendor doing broad-based public campaign and marketing, right, to reach a broader range of households. I think part of it is also that we have engaged some new partners in this work that we haven't typically worked with in the housing field. So I think that's really important for expanding the network in terms of who's doing this work and who they're reaching. That feels really critical. And yeah, I mean, I think generally those would be the two, ways that we're looking at it, but certainly it's a great point to bring back to our network agencies around outreach strategies in general. I would say you're right, they are seeing a lot of new households coming in their doors that they may not have served historically. So to the extent that they're already seeing those new households, it's making sure that who's ever working with those new households knows about this program and how to access it. So, an example of leveraging a network would be that we pushed out this information on this program to all of our weatherization providers. We said, you're in the homes of people. Let's make sure that all of our weatherization folks know about this program, how to answer questions, and how to direct people, right? That's sort of what I'm talking about when I'm saying expanding the network. But we need to make sure they have some basic level of information to do that.
Thank you. Senator Kitchell?
I guess my question might go to Richard Williams. One of the things that came with this money is an income test, and we knew it was going to take time to set it up. The rental assistance, for example, 110 million that went out, some of it obviously went to somewhat in addition to that, there was the 12.7 that went to public service on utility assistance. Can you just tell us what is this? Have those programs now become operational? Have we made the necessary modifications to collect income? Part of my concern is we're hearing obviously from landlords, and then the utilities are all weighing in terms of the arrearages that are accruing. Some of them are rental, and some are going to be homeowners, and of course some are businesses. So what is the status of the operation of the rental assistance program with that 110 million?
Good morning, Senator. Thank you for the question. So we did a soft launch last week, just because we're working through, it's a new application. As you mentioned, there's income testing. There's lots of information that needs to be uploaded. So we're working with our vendor, our call center, and also our media folks that we have not started a media campaign on this. It's more or less been kind of word of mouth and a little bit up on our website, but and our landlord portal will be coming live soon, hopefully in the next day or two. But last week, with a soft launch, we received 494 applications that totaled over $4.3 million. So for a soft launch, the word has got out without a lot of media campaign. About 1.6 million are folks still looking for a rearage. 2.6 million is for forward rental assistance, and there's about $139,000 we have been requested for what we call money to move, for someone to move into a more stable housing unit. So we're trying to make the process easy. It's a much more complicated program than the CARES fund program was, the $25 million. That's going to create challenges. We really are dependent on the renter applying. And so now we're trying to focus on how do we get an application for the landlords, because there's a lot of data on income would not be appropriate for a landlord to see or know of about a renter. And so we're trying to guard that information, but at the same time, get applications coming in from landlords that then landlords can work with their renters, and then we can work these folks through the program. So it has challenges, no doubt, just because the guidelines from the Treasury. Treasury knows how to manage money, but they don't really know how to manage housing programs. And this is a very similar program to a lot of federal rental housing programs with all the addition. We have to do a household test on income, and that's done by county. So yes, it comes with a lot more challenges, but I'm very hopeful and starting to feel good about the program, even though we're still in a light launch.
Okay, that's helpful to know that it's actually the door has been opened. I appreciate the update. And it's the same true for the utility assistance. I know that I don't believe is Riley here?
I am here.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I guess you're on my other screen.
Okay. The same is roughly true. We're lagging Richard in kind of the launch, so we're still at least a week away from essentially launching the utility portion of this. But we're essentially leveraging as much as we can the base that Richard and the ASHA have laid, and we expect that to be starting up very soon.
Okay. Thank you. Representative Fagan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Williams, just a very specific question for you, prompted by what your last answer was. I've been in contact with a landlord who had to move out of state from his house because his wife's mom was not in best of health, so they moved in with mom, but rented the house out here. The person they rented to is very non-compliant, won't let them on the property, won't talk to them, and is not paying rent. Is there any help for an individual like that through this program? I'm thinking not, but I figured I'd ask the question anyway.
Well, we are getting, Representative Fagan, we are getting a lot of calls, not only from legislators, but from landlords about similar situation. Commissioner Hanford probably gets more than I do, but these are difficult situations. And that's, again, why it would be helpful for moving this money to Agency of Human Services, because we're waiting for legal aid to get staffed up to be able to help us. Right now, they don't have staff. Their staff, ended last December. I'm sure I presume they're anticipating that they will receive a contract, and they're probably taking whatever steps appropriate, but until the money lands, they can't do anything. So that's, I won't say that's harmed us, but we're sensitive that we can't refer individuals to legal aid right now, so we're holding back forwarding renters to them. We are working with the Vermont Landlords Association. I would suggest that landlord contact that association. They will talk to anyone, and they receive funding through the Department of Housing and Community Development with the $25 million CARES program, and I believe they've applied again. They've been very helpful for us. And we haven't talked about mediation, but that was a program that we worked with Vermont Legal Aid and Vermont Landlord Association last year that the Landlord Association stood up. That was pretty successful, and I think we ought to take a really hard look at that. If we can get people talking, then a lot of times we can work out some of these situations. There are, we do hear, there's the moratorium, has kind of added its own issues here that the feedback we get back. So I think as Vermont gets back to normal, whatever that is, and if the emergency order is lifted by the governor, then, as you folks know, 30 days after that, landlords can they can still take action now. It's just that the courts are not hearing any cases for non-payment of rent. But landlords, if they have situations, can still file with the court. But there are about 600 cases still pending before the courts. So there's going to be a backlog when we're starting to see the courts open for other reasons, and but there will be a time to catch up. But yeah, the previous program, we were able to help those landlords at least with half of the rent. Under these Treasury guidelines, we unfortunately can't do that. And the American Rescue Act plan, we haven't seen the Treasury guidance on that at all. There's an additional $152 million small state minimum coming in to Vermont, and we are working with AOA to look at those allocations. We have a little bit more time to spend that money, but hopefully we'll have some more flexibility. I'm not sure I answered your question, but we are sensitive. We are very sensitive to the landlord's needs.
You did, and I have a couple of different options based upon your answer, so thank you very much.
Thank you. So committee, before I ask for a motion on the particular question in front of us, which is the approval of the transfer of $6 million from the Department of Housing and Community Development to the Agency of Human Services, we are fortunate to have as guests the representatives of all of the entities responsible for the $200 million that we allocated earlier. So one last call for any questions. I mean, this is a rather unique opportunity to inquire about the use of those funds in this forum. I'm not seeing any hands go up. A question that I have in a general nature is a concern about utility arrearages and any concerns that there may be in addressing that, particularly, I gather, given the income restrictions of the arrearages money. And Mr. Allen, I'm guessing that is to you. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Sure. Just to be clear, we concluded a program using the CRF funds last year, spent 8.8 million. That was framed very broadly. That covered not only residential, but also non-residential, so businesses and commercial. And we spent all that money. It took us 4 months to kind of to make our way through those funds, but now we're presented with an opportunity to spend money on the residential side, and it's a subset of the residential side, obviously, because it's renters, so it's 30% of the households, and beyond that, it's kind of means tested, so it's a subset of what we are going through. That said, it's framed differently, and it's a bit challenging for me to kind of resize and rethink kind of what the need is relative to that. But, in broad terms, I think that, of the 12.7 million, we have 1.27 million available for administration. And then we have, something in the neighborhood of 11 million and a little bit more to kind of run the program with. And I would expect that, probably half of that will go toward arrearages to cover, the types of things that we were able to cover in the prior program. But it's apparent to me that the need that is associated with the demand for assistance that we've experienced in the past is much larger than what we're proposing through this program.
Okay, thank you. So an issue perhaps to be addressed in the future, although I have no idea how. Committee, any additional questions? Would someone care to make a motion? Senator Kitchell?
Yes, I will move the reallocation of $6 million from the Department of Housing and Community Development to the Department of Children and Families. So that's what the motion would be, to reallocate $6 million from the Housing Stability Services allocation from Housing and Community Development to DCF.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Senator Westman. Senator Sears?
Yeah, just a question. I'm focused pretty much on the judiciary and when the moratorium on evictions, et cetera, would take place. And are you prepared for a huge, is the state prepared for that? Both legal aid and the the Vermont Landlords Association are mentioned in your memo of 9 million. Are they prepared for what might happen once that goes? And is this money able to be used for that purpose? I noted you said counseling, tenant landlord counseling, mediation services. I'm meeting with the judiciary at 9 a.m. to go over their reopening and restart plan and funding for this. So obviously not just evictions moratorium, but other things that have been backlogged within the judicial system.
Who would like to take that? Ms. Phillips?
Yes, we have already made a substantial award to Vermont Legal Aid. Part of what is included under Housing Stability Services is legal services and landlord-tenant mediation. And with this additional allocation, we're poised to increase that and be able to do more. So I think they are positioning themselves to be able to respond.
Okay. That would also be in response to Representative Fagan's concern. No, doesn't deal with the landlord.
The Vermont landlords will come through Commissioner Hannaford's office.
Yeah, Josh Hanford here, Commissioner of Housing Community Development. Yes, we have a grant agreement almost ready to go with Vermont Landlords Association to help them work with landlords on the same issue, but from their side. I think what I've been trying to do is stress that for tenants, they need to participate in this program to ensure their housing is stable going forward. Because if they don't participate, their landlords aren't going to receive the rental arrearage. And when the eviction moratorium ends, they will seek, eviction. So it's not good enough for, a tenant to step back and not participate at all, because there will be consequences. Unfortunately, we haven't found a way to provide the money directly to the landlords to cover the situation. But we're doing so much outreach to the tenants to make them understand that this is their chance to correct all their arrears and avoid eviction going forward. And they need to take this opportunity. Otherwise, we can't protect them once the eviction moratorium ends. So that's part of the extraordinary outreach and why so many different groups are being involved to work with tenants, landlords, from every direction to help them understand how important it is for them to access these funds and access them now to hopefully avoid a backlog and increase in filings and evictions.
I'll state on the record my concern for all of this, and that we may not be prepared, and then sometime in September, when the moratorium ends or whenever it does, there'll be a deluge.
One of the
you are prepared.
Senator Sears, one of the things that the Vermont Landlords Association, you may want to call them into committee and talk. They have been proposing for a while a small change to the eviction moratorium language that adds a component that says if tenants have the ability to pay or are eligible for access to funding, that should be a process allowed under the eviction moratorium now, because then it would incent folks to access these funds and get ahead of any sort of surge in evictions. But so far that hasn't gone anywhere. But they are, they have provided that language to the policy committees to look at and consider adding to the current eviction moratorium language now.
Okay, I appreciate that. And that's something we may be able to look at, but with the limited time we've been given to the rest of this session, I just hope we make sure that we're prepared to ensure that more people don't end up homeless as the process moves forward, rather than solving a problem, we create a bigger problem. That's my concern.
The only thing I could add to that is, with national studies out there that have looked at Vermont compared to other states, we have been viewed as the most housing stable through this pandemic, and feel that we have less of a surge of evictions coming than almost any other state. Most states did not put CRF money to play to clear back evictions. Most states much larger than us that did try to clear arrearages had very little success. We outspent many of our neighboring states with much larger populations. So I share your concern, but I feel we are probably in a better position than almost any other state on this metric that have been looked at by outside groups.
Well, that's good to hear. I hope you're right. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, I'd also like to add to Senator Sears' question that because of the clarification from recent Treasury guidance, out of the 200 million, we can now really plan to put up to 20 towards that housing stability section, which would, include the eviction mitigation, efforts, whether it's on the side of the renter, on the side of the landlord. I think those are all in play. And right now we have 9 million that's allocated to that use. So with the 53 million that is not allocated to a specific use right now, we would have the option later on down the road to put up to 11 towards this type of activity. And that needs to be balanced, of course, against the needs of the hotel motel. And I think that I think that's one thing to consider as we move forward, that that Treasury guidance really solidified our ability to invest up to 20 million in this area. And the reason we didn't initially propose that is because of the ambiguity in the Treasury guidance when we were going through this exercise before.
Okay, thank you. Representative Ansel?
Thank you. I've been hearing over the months, actually, a couple of situations from landlords where the concern, there hasn't been payment of rent, but the real concern has been destruction of property, not allowing the landlord on the property, really difficult situations. And I haven't known where to send them. I've sent them to the Vermont Landlords Association, which has been sympathetic, but not very helpful. And so I'm wondering, I know we've sort of touched on this situation, but these situations are not, it's not the non-payment of rent that's a problem, but it's the treatment of the property and so on. And I'm wondering if one of the experts here can tell me what recourse they might have. And Mr. Hanford, is it you that I should be sending them to?
It's actually the local police. Unfortunately, these landlords need to prove a level of destruction and crime committed in order to make it through that eviction moratorium clause that allows it to go forward under these conditions, because there's destruction of property, unsafe actions, crime, threats to other residents. And that's been very hard to prove. You need evidence, and we have, the eviction moratorium needs to either be adjusted, the courts need to be open to hear these cases, or the police need to be involved to prove that there's crimes being committed so that can be presented in court. Unfortunately, those are the options. And the Landlords Association will help guide the landlords through that, but they can't do anything either.
Right. And I'll just point out that in my little towns, we don't really have local police. So that makes it challenging.
The state police have been called in cases I've been aware of. It's still been hard to provide the direct evidence. I wish I had, I very much wish I had a different answer for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Kornheiser?
Thanks. I think we put the eviction moratorium in place as a public health measure, and we might want to think about having something on the other side to help make landlords whole for destruction of property that happened during it. But I think it was a good public health measure. My question is that I think last time we met, you all were still looking for guidance on lot rent and whether this could be applied to lot rent. And I think we also had a little bit of a conversation about folks who are behind on their mortgages. And I wondered where we are with those two things.
I'll take that if you want. So lot rents, you're referring to mobile home parks, and yes, they're eligible to apply, just like they were for the original CARES Act money under the $25 million. They are eligible under the what we're calling ERA1 funds. As far as mortgage assistance, I think you're going to see that come down under the American Rescue Act plan. There's, I believe, $52 million coming into the state of Vermont for that. I'm sure the agency administration probably has some information on that, but that will be, I'm anticipating the Vermont Housing Finance Agency will probably be running that. There's also going to be a utility portion with that for homeowners. So I presume that they will be working with Mr. Allen too, seeking, I'm not sure how the agency administration will work that program, if they will divide that up between Mr. Allen's department and Vermont Housing Finance Agency, or if that money will go directly to Vermont Housing Finance Agency for both utilities. But that includes, water, sewer, electric, your typical fuels. My understanding, it also includes like garbage, composting. So it's pretty broad when it comes to utilities. So.
And so we wouldn't be able to use this new IT system that you've put considerable energy into standing up for that?
Well, it would be a different type of program. So we're dealing with renters. They're going to be dealing with homeowners, but they're looking at the same vendor that we're using. So possibly there can be some hopefully overlap there for those programs, but they will still have to go through an income determination under, at least so far, with the Treasury guidelines that we're looking at. We'll still be under 80% of area median income.
Yeah, I would add to what Mr. Williams said that I believe, if memory serves me, the homeowners program will actually be up to 100% of area median. So it's slightly more, slightly higher income sensitivity level, but overall a very similar structure. And yes, I know, I do know that I think VHFA is certainly on the table as an option to administer the program. The Treasury has not released guidance yet. It's been marginally frustrating for us. But the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan, established 45 days after enactment, which was March 11th. And that 45 days runs out on April 25th. So the administration is tracking this extremely closely to see when the application process will go up to get access to these funds. And we're preparing, contingency efforts if, on April 23rd, the application process is not live with Treasury yet. We want to make sure that Vermont does not lose access to those funds, because the act is very clear that if a state doesn't apply, those funds can be reallocated or shall be reallocated to other states. So it is first and foremost on my radar to make sure that Vermont does not lose access to that money. It's the calculation's a little unclear. It's at least 50. I think it might be 52 because of the demographic and some mortgage rate calculations that get mixed in there. But we're definitely watching it very closely. And I think the program is very similar, with the exception that it doesn't really have that. I don't believe it has that carve out for housing stability services. But I think once we get closer to that, once we see that certification process, the application process, that will help us, with program design. I think that's part of the problem here, is that it took Treasury a couple months to get guidance out for the rental assistance program. And the current trend is for Treasury to use all available time before issuing any guidance. On the American Rescue Plan, there was just so much rolled in there for them. So I think that's definitely an opportunity there with the homeowner section, but it is going to be delayed by first getting the certification process, getting the funds, and getting even initial guidance from Treasury, unfortunately.
I would just add that, we've been working closely with Vermont Housing Finance Agency. Their national groups are watching this very closely. Everyone's monitoring. Everyone's really frustrated that Treasury is just taking so long, saying you need to apply in 45 days and not a peep is coming out. The past Treasury, we may not have liked their answers, but their answers came quick. So this is a little frustrating. The other piece on the housing stability services for homeowners, for mortgage foreclosure prevention, I want to make sure folks know that they're not just left hanging. We have another source of funding, the CDBG Coronavirus Relief Fund special allocation through my department. We have granted much of those funds to the local homeownership centers, the regional nonprofits, with specific funding to help counsel and prevent foreclosures for low-income homeowners that kind of wrap around this. And they've already got access to those funds to start to do some outreach and be prepared to help. I think I know other testimony in other committees, we've talked about, we have this matrix that's about signed off that looks at all of the housing funding since this pandemic started, both in place, spent, and proposed, that shows you, is it for renter? Is it for homeowner? Is it for services? Is it for capital? that I think will give people a big picture, because it's so much. It's over $850 million already. And it's quite broad, and it's hard for people to keep track of. So this is coming, and we'll share it with you as well.
That's good to hear. Thank you. Representative Briglin?
I think both commissioners started to address the question I have, but I want to ask it in a quantitative way, which is in terms of hitting the 65% threshold disbursement by September 30th, is the need so great that once these guidelines come down from Treasury and these programs are stood up, we're going to have the ability to get that money out quickly? Or how much of a is a bar, how high is that bar to get over that it's going to be really difficult to hit that 65% threshold by September 30th?
I will try to attempt to answer that, and then maybe ask Richard to jump in. So the 65% is on this first 200 million emergency rental assistance. If any indication of 4 million in the first soft launch of that program, plus the utilities hasn't started, we're hopeful we can hit that. If that's the case, we're going to need to find a way to access this 53 million that's in reserve right now, which could happen during the summer when the legislature isn't in session, and that requires an appropriation. So, we haven't, this meeting isn't here to talk about that, but I think that's something we all need to think about. If we're successful moving this money as fast as we hope we can, we're going to need a mechanism to access that other 53 million quickly sometime this summer. And I don't know exactly what our plan is for that at this point.
Okay. Thank you. We need to do some more planning and in anticipation of some of these questions. I have one final question, and then we need to move on. Of the 10% of the grant that can be retained for administrative purposes, or let me just say it that way, for administrative purposes, could we allocate some of that to uses that are not explicitly allowed in the individual area? So what I'm thinking of, for example, is with the utility money, given the income limitations of the particular money allocated for that, could we take some of the 10% overhead money, and if it's not needed for administrative purposes, use that to apply to resolving utility related issues, as an example?
So I would say, Madam Chair, that I can take that question back for more consideration, but my initial reaction is that not directly, no. That depending on how things work out with budgeting, you might be able to figure out a way to indirectly fund some other activities. But directly speaking, we can charge up to 10%, but it's not an automatic 10%. We have to book the direct expenses to that program, and we have to substantiate it. So if we substantiate 10% of expenses, it really depends on how that, and honestly, the potential, I think, would only be there with an internal department. For example, VSHA has to operate their program, and their budget is outside of the state government. So 110 million is in a section that is not subject to the internal mechanisms of state budgeting. So I would say it's possible, but I think not directly, no, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. We may want to think about how to be I don't want to say creative in the use of that money, but figure out how to broaden its use. Senator Kitchell.
I guess one of the questions I have of Doug is obviously we're constrained by the conditions that come with this money, whether we're trying to access the 10% or making sure everybody, but we're going to have households that have income above. I know the administration has its own proposals around how to spend $1 billion, but in fact, if we don't help with utilities, we've heard it could increase rates by as much as 2%. So would you just confirm that this would be a permissible use of ARPA funds to deal with utility arrearages that don't fit under the buckets that we have here, either from the homeowners or the renters?
So, Senator, with the obvious caveat that I'm not chiming in on the policy side of things, I would say that from a definitions perspective, yes, one allowable sector of ARPA funds is very similar to the CARES Act, that it has to be pandemic related, that but it does not have an income qualification. It's just that they suffered economic harm as a result of the pandemic. So I think that the precedent of us using CARES Act, and I believe that program was rated as a low risk program when we did the risk evaluation. I would say that we haven't seen the ARPA guidance yet, but I think it's extremely likely that would be an allowable use of ARPA funds. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's time for us to move to the motion. And if I could wordsmith it a wee bit, if I think what we need to do is to approve the request to reallocate it, just given the function of the JFC within this, as we're supposed to behave. So we would be approving the request to reallocate these funds. Is that acceptable, Senator Kitchell and Westman?
Yeah, I thought I did that, to reallocate from
it's
DHCD to DCF, but that's fine with me.
It's the request.
Oh,
not the actual.
All right. So
wordsmithing. Yeah.
All right. So I will move to approve the request to reallocate.
There we go. Thank you. And Senator Westman seconds that. All in favor, please say aye.
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 No, Peter's telling me we call the roll on this.
We do call the roll on these type votes. So
yeah, Peter, call the roll, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Ansel.
Yes.
Representative Briglin.
Yes.
Representative Fagan is yes. Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Balin.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Hooper.
Yes.
We are 10-0. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Folks, thank you very much for joining us and for this conversation. Before we let you go, I just feel the need to acknowledge Richard Williams's retirement, and I'm not sure I'm going to see him, and I'm sure we won't see him again in this forum. And just to say thank you for your years of service, and enjoy the other side of work. So thank you all very much for being with us.
Thank you for your kind words. It's been great working with you guys all these years. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Yeah, appreciate your time. Next on our agenda is consideration of the request from the Agency of Education to provide some to the pass-through grants to the independent schools. You can see I'm fumbling on this because I haven't thought about it as much. We have Ms. Briggs Campbell to address us on this, to describe the request, and I will turn it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Representative Hooper. Jill Briggs Campbell from the Agency of Education, and also Cassandra Ryan is joining me as well. So we are here today to provide information and answer any questions around our request for approval of the, are you ready for a mouthful here? The Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, Emergency Assistance for Non-Public Schools. We'll just call it GEAR-EANS, if that's okay. And this is a program that is from the CARISA Act, which was passed December 27th of last year. Essentially what this program does, so it goes through the governor's office, but is administered and managed by the Agency of Education. And if folks are at all familiar with the ESSER fund, the first ESSER 1 program required that our SUs and SDs provide equitable services for our independent schools. And what Congress did in ESSER 2 and 3 is that they removed that equitable services requirement and created this new program, the GEAR-EANS program, to provide support to our independent schools and have the Agency of Education essentially administer that program. And so that's sort of the background of this program. The reason for the expedited request is that the federal statutory language around this has a very, very telescoped time frame. So we were required to submit our state certification and assurances on February 22nd of this year, which we did. Once that was submitted, we received our award on the 23rd, so the next day, and then we were required to release the application 1 month after that, which we did, March 23rd. And now, and we received the first applications from our independent schools the next day, and we are required to approve those with, or review and approve those or deny them within 30 days. So as you can see, that the time frame is very, very, very short. And so that is where the expedited request comes from.
Members, do you have questions for yes, Representative Kornheiser?
Thanks. I'm curious how the Agency of Education is able to hold the independent schools accountable for learning loss, or whatever the exact language is in the federal grant specifications.
Yeah, excellent question. So this is an unusual program. There's never really been anything like it, to be honest. And so the way that it works is that there's a series of allowable costs, nothing as broad as we've seen in, say, the ESSER funds, which Representative Kornheiser, I know I've come and talked to you many times about. So there's a list of allowable costs. The independent schools are able to, we are not granting funds. This is really important. We are not granting funds to the independent schools. Federal statute prevents that, so that is not allowed. There's two paths that an independent school can request here. One is if they have costs going back to March 13th of 2020, they can request, and they're within that allowable cost list. And this includes things like PPE and sanitizer, plexiglass barriers, COVID testing, educational technology, so laptops, that sort of thing. You know, portable air purifiers, a lot of those really basic kind of response costs. If they have those costs going back to March 13th of last year, they can request reimbursement, but the way that reimbursement works here is that when they request that reimbursement, they also sign a transfer of title agreement, because the agency is required to hold title to all supplies and equipment for which we provide reimbursement. The same thing applies for any future reimbursement that they request. So if in their applications they're saying we need 15 air purifiers for our classrooms, and we find that to be an allowable cost, when they do their reimbursement request, they'll do a transfer of title, including an inventory list. They'll be required to track those. And at the end of the period of performance, which is September 30th of 2023, they will either be required to return those goods to the Agency of Education, unless it's something obvious like they've used up all their masks, or disinfectant. They also have the option to potentially purchase them from the Agency of Education at fair market value, or if they participate in a federal title program, and this gets a little bit in the weeds, and they can make the case that the good, the equipment, the laptop, the whatever it is a necessary requirement for those programs, then they could make that case and we would continue to hold title for those equipment and goods. So that's sort of their options. The third option is they can ask the Agency of Education to procure equipment, supplies, or potentially, and Representative Kornheiser, this is how I'm getting to the answer to your question. If, for example, their need was staff to provide after-school tutoring, something like that, then the agency would procure a contract for a person to provide those services. So in that sense, we are always in control of the funds. That's the requirement of the GEAR-EANS program. And we would be anything that has to do with staffing of payroll, summer program, after school tutoring, anything like that, professional development for curriculum around learning loss, that sort of thing. The agency, the only option there is procurement. And so the agency would actually be tasked with contracting the independent contractor. Does that help to address your question?
It leaves me with a whole pile of other questions that I'm not sure we have time to get into today. So I will hold on to my questions for a minute.
Okay, absolutely. And we understand it is a brave new world for us on this one as well. So
Thank you. Representative Briglin?
Could I get a list of who the approved recognized nonprofit independent schools are? I have a number of private but also independent schools in my area, and if they haven't already contacted you, they'll be very interested in this. And then the second thing, you may have already addressed this with Representative Kornheiser's question, which is a couple of my schools that are independent schools have pretty massive summer programs that they're rolling out, kind of in the realm of getting students caught up for what they've lost in the last 12 months. Is that the kind of expense we're talking about with this program?
Yes, so I'll tackle your first question, and then that's an excellent second question. So yes, we can absolutely get you a list of approved and recognized schools. Prior to the release of the application, we did a great deal of targeted outreach. Our independent school team at Agency of Education actually personally contacted all 130 approved and recognized independent schools in the state of Vermont. There is an additional eligibility requirement, and that has eliminated some schools, which is that if the schools received a PPP loan, which many schools have applied for because of tuition loss, after December 27th of last year, then they are not eligible for GEAR-EANS. That's part of the statutory language. So that has reduced the list somewhat. We also then asked them, we did a survey, we did like an initial outreach and gave them programmatic guidance and, what does this look like? Then we asked them to do an intent to apply prior to the release of the application. And so we had something like 60 schools respond, and those are our current eligible applicants. If a school has missed that boat and decides that they would like to apply for GEAR-EANS, they wouldn't be able to apply for this round, but in the American Rescue Plan Act, there is a GEAR-EANS 2. So they would have a second bite at the apple. But we did do really extensive outreach to ensure that anyone that was interested had the opportunity to apply. In terms of your second question around the summer programs, we have had a few schools ask us about this. And so that would, if they needed something like staffing for, building out their summer program to reach more students or offering extended hours or whatever that may be, that is something that they could partner with us to procure those contractors. We haven't had a lot of schools ask for that as a cost. And I will say that there is an allocation formula. So, the total amount available to all independent schools, eligible independent schools, is just over 4 million. We developed from the intent to apply that group an allocation formula based on their total enrollment, and then an additional, which is just over $500 per pupil, and then an additional $208 or $280 for low-income students. There is a targeting requirement for this grant. And so that is then what becomes available to them. So, some of our schools that have higher number of low-income students are getting that boost from that additional $280. So it is an allowable cost for them to ask for procurement of staff for summer programs. We haven't seen a lot of folks asking for it yet.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Senator Balin?
Actually, Ms. Briggs Campbell just addressed some of the questions that I had in her last few remarks. It was about targeting those families most in need. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. So I don't see any other hands or for questions, and so a motion would be in order to accept the grant, I believe is the question before us. Somebody can correct me.
So, Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we move to accept JFO Grant 3043 in the amount of $4,284,369 for GEAR-EANS program.
Is there a second?
Second.
Senator Cummings seconds it. And so again, is this a roll call?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. So call the roll, please. Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Ansel.
Yes.
Representative Briglin.
Yes.
Representative Fagan, yes. Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Senator Sears. Senator Balin.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Westman.
Yes.
Senator Sears. Absent. Representative Hooper.
Yes.
901.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ms. Briggs Campbell and Ms. Ryan, for joining us. We appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Representative Kornheiser, if you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I know it's a complicated program, and I'm sure that your questions are very good ones. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
So the next item is the approval. Oh, just in time, Paul Daly is coming in. The next item is the approval of the 48 limited service positions within the Department of Health. Mr. Daly, I was worried. We are ready to move to you on our agenda. And this was an expedited request that came through either yesterday or the day before. It must have been the day before. And while it's associated with a grant that we approved earlier, it is such a large number of limited service positions that, given we were having the meeting, it felt appropriate to inquiry of you as to the use, the purpose, and just to get a little more insight into what's going on with this request. So can you enlighten us, please?
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you for putting this on the agenda so quickly. It was actually submitted to the Joint-Fiscal staff yesterday, so we were quite surprised you're willing to take it up. And I'm looking at your participant list. We may be joined this morning by Dr. Kelso, our state epidemiologist, who can be the subject matter expert on this, but I'll briefly explain that the health department has received a succession of grants that have come in the form from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention as supplements to existing grants. The two main grants are the immunization grant, which has been a 20-year continuous award to the health department, and the other is the epidemiology and laboratory capacity grant, which has been was approved by the Joint-Fiscal Committee for acceptance probably a decade ago. So this has been an advantage for state health departments because it allows us to put the money to work much quicker. And so what we have are two awards that were the base, that in the budget for spending these awards, we're planning to, we need staff. Our limiting factor in this incident, fortunately from my perspective, has never been money. Almost from the beginning, it has been the bodies, and this is a request for 48 positions. Most of them are in the Division of Health Surveillance, the Epidemiology section and the laboratory section. 13 of the staff, or 12 of the staff, will work in our local district offices, an epidemiologist assigned full-time for each of our district offices. And I think that's sort of, we've provided a sort of an abbreviated RFR in the package. It shows the division and the location for each of the 48 positions. And in parallel, we're working with classification at DHR to provide the full RFR and org charts if the committee authorizes these positions. The epidemiology and lab capacity grant that will fund most of the positions, the grant award was the most recent grant award was $35.9 million. So the budget that's going to fund these positions, at least through June of 2024, is in that $35.9 million award. The immunization grant, which in this particular request funds just two positions, was a $5.6 million grant award. But in the weeks since we submitted our request for positions, we've received an additional $32.8 million for COVID vaccination efforts. And I still don't see Dr. Kelso here, but I think the expectation is you'll see us again in another month or two as we get a better handle on what will be the responsibility for vaccination after the initial surge of getting folks vaccinated the first time over the next few months, because there's funding for, it will be the health department's financial responsibility to continue that for the foreseeable future. I'll stop. I'm happy to entertain any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Representative Kornheiser.
Thanks. I know that you, Department of Health staff, have spent more than a year now sort of away from their core jobs doing some of this work. Does this mean that those folks will be able to return to their previous job descriptions?
Thank you, Representative Kornheiser. That's their fervent hope. It's not going to happen soon. If you folks authorize these positions today, I think these folks are going to really honestly start coming online in July and August, just through the recruiting process and the training. What they're really going to help us do is help those folks who've been in emergency status through the state's Emergency Operations Center and the Health Operations Center begin a process of demobilization. These staff are part of our overall plan. We've recently executed a contract with a firm that provides sort of full service contact tracing that will, when they get up to full speed in the next few weeks, they'll be providing the equivalent of 125 FTEs. I see Dr. Kelso has joined us. She could tell you more about the specifics, but in general, we've got about 350 people at work there are National Guards folks, temps, people loaned to us from other departments. Those are the folks that these 48 staff will help us to demobilize and go back to work. The health department staff are probably going to be at the end of that line as we return to our other business, but the hope is by Labor Day, most of the folks will be there.
Thank you. That's very helpful in understanding this. Dr. Kelso, thank you for joining us. We're kind of, Mr. Daley gave us an overview and we're in question mode. Representative Fagan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this has almost been answered by Mr. Daley, but I'll ask it anyway. On going at it from the opposite direction, what happens if we don't do this?
God only knows. Our staff and the folks who have come to assist us have been at this since February. They're literally exhausted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we sometimes, given where we sit, we do not observe what you are seeing on a daily basis and the tremendous effort that folks have put into this. And as we look forward to the reopening, we forget the tremendous amount of work that is still going on to get us there.
Yeah, if I could speak to that just for a second, I apologize for joining at this point. You know, we're going to continue to see cases. We're not going to get to a place where we don't have any cases because the vaccines are not 100% effective. Not everyone will choose or be able to be vaccinated. So just by way of example, you know, we're over 21,000 cases of COVID-19 to date in Vermont. And from the epidemiology perspective alone, in 2019, we received about 18,000 electronic lab reports for reportable conditions like hepatitis and salmonella. And they were from 16 different reporting facilities, the Vermont hospitals and a few other labs. So 18,000 electronic lab results in total in calendar year 2019. In 2020, we received 1.3 million electronic lab reports due to all the COVID testing. And in just January and February alone of 2021, we received over 440,000 electronic lab reports from over 100 different reporting facilities across the country. So the workload is enormous, and that's just the lab reports coming in. That doesn't consider all of the contacting cases, interviewing them, contacting each of their contacts and interviewing them, providing guidelines for facilities that are experiencing cases or outbreaks. We currently are reaching out to colleges, schools, childcare facilities, work sites, healthcare facilities, anytime they have a case who's infectious at that venue during their infectious period. So there's a tremendous amount of work, not to mention all of the lab work and lab testing and specimen processing that's happening, and the communications efforts, keeping our websites up to date.
Thank you. Senator Kitchell.
My question, 48 positions, do you anticipate, and I know you'd like to have them filled probably tomorrow if they were approved, do you anticipate trouble filling them? That seems like an awful lot of interviewing and hiring for limited service positions. So I was just wondering what you think your experience or what do you have for recruitment strategies? I realize you've been surviving on sort of borrowed horsepower that can't work, you know, that doesn't work in the long haul. So I was just wondering how you were thinking about getting the staffing that you've described as you need from this point on.
The health department leadership has been thinking about this with us, and it is a concern, but we've already reached out to the CDC Foundation, which has hired and placed a handful of positions in our state health department for the past year. That agreement is ending, but the CDC Foundation has offered to help with recruitment and onboarding and training of staff. Leadership is also looking at contractor who might be able to help us with advertising and recruiting and interviewing, and getting some help from others across the department to at least do initial screening and interviewing so that the EPI staff can, make the final selection of who we need. And there are people out there. There are a number of temps currently working with us, and the people hired through the CDC Foundation and others who we think will be able to bring into a lot of these positions.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Daly, I think you said that there were 350 people who have been brought in one way or another to provide assistance in this area, and this is just shy of 50. So it sounds like you have a much larger need than this represents. And so what's the plan for continuing to demobilize those folks and to bring in additional assistance?
Representative Hooper, these 48 positions are on top of about 16 positions that your committee authorized last fall. And combined with the contract that we recently executed that would provide essentially the equivalent of 125 staff, that'll get us in the range of close to 200. And our hope at this point is that as the workload we'll see significant and sustained decline in the workload in the 2 to 4 months coming. So our hope is that as the workload declines, our capacity to replace those folks who have been temporarily assigned to us will meet up.
Okay, thank you. And so these folks are for the next 3 years. Those other people that have been brought on, I assume, are also time limited. But you're confident that you are putting into place the resources as the workload ramps down, and that you have the resources. This will bring you the resources you need to accomplish what needs to be done.
It'll bring the staff closer to what we need. I mentioned earlier, we may be back in another month or so once we get a sense of the scale of work that's going to be involved in ongoing vaccination efforts. But the money's there, and Dr. Kelso and I think both agree that our hope is that there'll be continuing funding. We need to have a much deeper bench. If we don't learn the lessons of this pandemic in public health, shame on us.
Yeah. That certainly is the very interesting question that we have before us, and not to relax into complacency again. Committee, any other questions for Dr. Kelso or Mr. Daly? If Representative Kornheiser?
I just want to say thank you very much for all of the work that you and your offices have done to keep us all as healthy as we have been.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I suspect that we should throw a ticker tape parade for the, thousands of people who have helped get us so successfully to the other side of this. Fingers crossed. Yeah. So a motion is in order to, Peter, Representative Fagan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to make a motion to approve JFO Grant 3045 for the 48 limited service positions through June of 2024.
Is there a second? Senator Balint, thank you. I don't see any further hands. So Representative Fagan, will you call the roll, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Ansel.
Yes.
Representative Briglin.
Yes.
Representative Fagan, yes. Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Senator Sears. Senator Balint.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Westman.
Yes.
Senator Sears. Absent. Representative Hooper.
Yes.
901.
Great. Thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Kelso, Mr. Daly. We really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for being with us. Committee, is there any further action.
Madam Chair, can you just look at your phone just for a second, please?
Yes. Which one?
Is it okay for me to go?
Yeah, yes, it is. Thank you very much, Dr. Kelso. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate your time this morning. Thank you. Mr. Farnham, do you have something else for us?
Yes, Madam Chair. Actually, happy news. In the spirit of when before I said we were actively monitoring all of the the web pages to try to get a handle on the Treasury guidance. While you were on that last topic, I actually got notification that that landing pages have finally been created for the state and local fiscal recovery fund, the homeowner assistance fund, and the capital projects fund. And after this, I will be working to understand exactly what our responsibilities will be there and how much information has been put up. But I just thought it would be nice to make sure the committee was aware that has changed in the last 10 minutes, apparently, that information has gone up and that Treasury is now promising that the application will be launched soon for the Homeowners Assistance Fund. So some of the frustrating lack of clarity hopefully will be cleared up a little bit, and we will be following up on that and making sure that we don't miss any opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you. Amazing how things happen in the electronic era.
They move very quickly right now, Madam Chair.
So we appreciate that. Any further business for the committee? If not, do we have motions to adjourn? Is that in order?
So moved.
Okay. So all of those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you all very much for your time this morning. We will see you around the building.
All right.